أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم به نستعين الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرج Alhamdulillah, it's a blessing to be able to attend the Azaa of Abu Abdullah. It's a point to be thankful of. Um, this thanks is quite interesting. This thanks is actually proportional to our knowledge of what we're thanking for. The mechanism of Azaa from the time of Karbala itself all the way to today, the way that Ahl Bayt alayhimussalam have laid it out, it's such that this thanking should be a real one. So every year you go to a majlis and you attend and you learn certain points and you develop constructively the implementation of those points throughout the year, the impact they have on your life and the changes they bring about. Uh, the correct mechanism is to link that to the majalises and to the mention of Abu Abdullah himself. And in doing that, when the year for the morning comes, you're actually somebody who is thinking based off of experience. It's not simply the idea of things. It's not simply the thanking because everybody else seems to be thanking and are appreciative of this love of Abu Abdullah, then I'm appreciative too. It's a more realistic idea where I see the development that this love and this connection has done to me. And in my growth, I experience and recognize the importance of this connection. And thus, the blessing of Abu Abdullah becomes that much more real for me. In terms of uh, the ahadith, we see that in Kamilul Ziyarat, there's a hadith that says that even Allah visits Abu Abdullah from his throne on a particular day. The hadith needs to be explained appropriately because clearly the visitation of Allah doesn't necessarily mean like how we visit, right? We were physically bound and we visit some place, and that means we weren't somewhere else and now we have to go somewhere and so on and so forth. In fact, in explanation of that hadith, the ulama say that this is actually uh, uh, an advisory to the believers and to all of existence that the very mechanism of creation and development, the arsh of Allah, the management system of Allah, in of itself is kind of focused and finds its focal point towards Abu Abdullah himself. That's an immensely important position Abu Abdullah has in all of existence. So um, we gain experience regarding that based on our own development and our own growth. And as that growth and that development occurs, our thankful nature towards the Azaa also increases. Having said this, this also kind of directs our vision and our understanding regarding the Azaas too. Because now we're not simply coming to the Azaa to feel an emotion and leave with no change happening. We recognize that the entire mechanism and system is such that it's meant to develop me, to uplift me, and to raise me. That means I come with that goal in mind. And hence now, when I organize the Azaas, when I talk about the points I'm talking about, when I take notes about the points that I'm taking notes on, they're focused on this idea of development. Today's point, we're trying to talk about the idea of control issues, especially in the family systems. You see, control is linked to three particular things: ilm, hilm, and silm. When you notice what control is a mechanism where a person wants to kind of have authority. Again, a layman understanding of control would be they want to have authority in a particular place such that if a change was to be enacted, that change is they have the capacity to enact that particular change. They maintain their freedom in situations, and so on and so forth. So control links with these types of ideas in the general sense. And we'll open it up a little bit. There's three historical events that we'll talk about to get an idea of control in its various aspects. Then we'll move into control in the family unit. And we look at the story of Abu Abdullah Imam Hussein alayhi salam, as he's leaving Medina. He is approached by his brother Muhammad Hanafiya. Muhammad Hanafiya says to Abu Abdullah that if you're leaving Medina and you're going towards basically Kufa um, through Mecca, don't do that, because the enemy, Banu Umayyah, they're vicious individuals. Yazid is vicious, he will attack you. Don't leave Medina, because while you're in Medina, you're safe. Okay, you have the Banu Hashim over here. It's your stronghold, and the chances of you to be really brought down here in Medina are significantly less. Don't go to Kufa. So if you notice, in that particular situation, Abu Abdullah has made his intent to go. He's actually in the caravan as he's departing Medina, and Muhammad ibn Hanafiya comes and is trying to impart that advice and kind of direct Abu Abdullah in a particular way and say, don't go, basically. This stems from the idea of ilm. In the control mechanism, if a person feels that they have more knowledge and more understanding and more capacity, then they wish to share sometimes that more knowledge and that more capacity. Of course, in this story, we recognize that the understanding of Muhammad the Hanafi regarding having more knowledge was not correct, was not appropriate. He was advising the Imam of his time. What we learn from Abu Abdullah is that Abu Abdullah is not one to say, don't give me advice. Even though he is somebody who has more knowledge, he says, let me hear what you have to say. This is a very good etiquette to keep in mind for later on when we talk about the family unit. That even in the scenario where it is absolutely certain that the person who's advising is actually advising from a lower level of understanding, the one taking in that particular advice, the etiquettes they follow, the mechanism they use is the same. What do you have to say? They hear them out, and then they explain further. Abu Abdullah explains to Muhammad ibn Hanafiya that basically this particular journey is one which is needed for the development of the whole ummah of the Holy Prophet. And we recognize now, after 1,000+ years, that the whole ummah of the Holy Prophet, in fact, includes to this day until Qiyamah. Salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajal. So, the second aspect that control issues link to is the idea of silm. You see, the story here is of Habib, and we notice that in the battlefield of Karbala, just before Ashura itself, Habib ibn Madahir goes to the various tribes that are around Karbala itself in an attempt to garner their trust and pull people to the camp of Abu Abdullah. And he's able to talk to certain tribes and get 1,000 men ready. Okay? And when he comes back to Abu Abdullah, he says, Abdullah, I had actually procured the bay'ah really from 1,000 individuals, from their chieftains and so on and so forth, and they were coming. But at that point, the Lashkar of Yazid sent their envoy and threatened those chieftains and those 1,000 individuals who initially agreed to assist the son of the Holy Prophet. They backed away. And he comes to Abu Abdullah and he tells him this in a very worried and panicked situation. Abu Abdullah listens to what he has to say and says, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Meaning, in this particular tent where there's Abu Abdullah and there's Habib only, there's no one else, and he's talking about countering an army within the next day or two, which amasses 30,000 plus. Habib has just brought information that the mere 1,000 that was about to join, even they've backed away, and Abu Abdullah over there is in absolute peace and says, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no authority and no power except with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Habib, who was in that panic, we see a panicked state in Habib before he enters the tent, because he's just, what is he going to come and report? He was sent to go get assistance, and he was only able to amass 1,000 individuals to help his Mawla, and he knows that the army on the other side has 30,000 plus. Already he knows that he's isn't on the apparent sense achieved that which would have saved his Mawla's life, really. But now that he comes even without those thousands, he's coming alone, he's in a panicked state. Abdullah calms down. As soon as Abu Abdullah says, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, we see the Habib's tone completely change. Habib himself has silm. Silm means what? Submission. So he comes to his Mawla and says, wait a second, if the Mawla and the Imam of the time is somebody who's at peace and who's not riled up, right? From that, he takes upon that trait on himself too. Okay? So in this mechanism, Habib uses silm, which allows Abu Abdullah to control his existence. Such that now Habib is able to have that same trait of calmness with him. This calmness doesn't originate from something fluffy. It originates from something very real, which is that Abu Abdullah tells to him that Habib, look, all this apparent power and apparent individuals and so on and so forth, this is nothing compared to the actual authority that belongs only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The last story, which links to the point of hilm, because we said control issues link with three things: ilm, silm, and hilm. Okay, these are the three areas that are predominant, and these are the three areas we want to talk about today, at least. So, in ilm, we talked about the story of Muhammad ibn Hanafi and Imam Hussein alayhi salam, how Muhammad ibn Hanafi thought he had more ilm, and hence he was advising and saying, don't go here, this might happen, and don't go there, this might happen, and don't trust this person, this might happen, and so on and so forth. And Abu Abdullah listened to him, and then basically explained to him that what I'm doing, I know what I'm doing. I have to go to Kufa and protect the ummah of my Prophet. In Islam, we talked about the story of Habib ibn Wadahir and how when an apparent situation happened, Habib was feeling that that they're losing control, hence that frustration was coming about within him, right? Allah calms him down. And having this taslim and this silm within Habib allowed him to let his master control his growth. Okay, if Habib did not have silm towards his master, right, then Abu Abdullah's comment regarding Allah's authority wouldn't have calmed him down. He would have said, yes, I know, but, and he would continue with that particular frustrated scenario. The last story is of basically linking hilm to control. In the time of the second caliph, the governor of Madain gets removed and Salman Farsi is appointed. And when the second caliph appoints Salman Farsi to actually participate in the governorship of Madain, Salman Farsi tells the second caliph, who are you? You don't command me. You don't command me. The only commander that I listen to and I follow is Amir al-Mu'mineen. And Salman Farsi in that particular action goes to Amir al-Mu'mineen and says, Amir al-Mu'mineen, I've been told to go to Madain because they need a ruler over there, a governor over there. Would you appoint me as a person to go there and do this? So he gets permission from Amir al-Mu'mineen and then he goes to Madain. You see, hilm, this kind of comparative judgment, this kind of wisdom-filled judgment, allowed for a unique thing to occur in history. That in the time where the apparent authority was with the second caliph, right, this historical fact of how Salman became the ruler of Madain displayed that even that in the eyes of the Sahabi of the Holy Prophet, the true rulership and the true control was still in the hands of Amir al-Mu'mineen, not the apparent second Khalifa. Okay. So where the control occurs here is that there's multiple things happening. There's an apparent caliphate that's trying to bring about control on Salman and make him go to Madain and become the ruler over there. And then there's this control that Salman himself takes into his own account based off of understanding of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He uses his hilm, his understanding, and his comparative judgment. Salman could have said that, okay, the previous companion who was there, Hudhaifa, he's also a companion of Imam Ali, correct? And if Imam Ali approved of Hudhaifa to go there, perhaps Imam Ali would approve me to go there as well. Let me privately go talk to Amir al-Mu'mineen and not make it a public matter at all. Who cares what the second caliph is telling me? I'll privately go talk to Imam Ali, get my orders from there, and I'll do what I need to do. But Salman doesn't do that. He first puts the command that's coming in its place. Says, who are you to command me? the Holy Prophet has instructed us to take command only from his true Khalifa after him, which is Amir al-Mu'mineen. In this way, Salman is able to retake control of the situation. Did the results change? Think about it. Bilakhare, Salman, if he was going to go and become the governor of Madain, had he not done any of this stuff, he would have still become the governor of Madain, correct? But in this particular way, when he went and he talked to Amir al-Mu'mineen in this mechanism, he retook control of the scenario. He was no longer being controlled by that caliphate that was imposed upon him. You see that? He retook control of that scenario. Did the end result change? No. These 3 points we'll see in the family unit in a bit, inshallah. Salawat. The key point that we can see in all 3 stories is that true control and true authority belongs to Allah. Okay? And then when ghayrullah, when other than Allah is trying to take control, right? The individuals who belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they speak up. They act in an appropriate manner. So if you look at the story of Imam Hussein and Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, right? Imam Hussein is clearly the representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? He's the Imam of the time. Even Muhammad Hanafiya, before he starts to speak to him, he says, Allah has made, it's quite interesting, he says, Allah has made it wajib upon us to obey you. Once he says that, then he continues in giving him advice as well. It's quite interesting. The reason why Muhammad ibn Hanafiya didn't come to Karbala is a different talk to have in a different time, inshallah. In one place, Abu Abdullah tells Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, I would like you to stay in Medina and be my eyes, such that the changes that are happening over here keep me informed, for example. There's other things there too. Nonetheless, we see that when Muhammad ibn Hanafiya is coming about and about to present an opinion to Imam Hussein, which is rooted in something other than Imam Hussein's direction and so on and so forth, Imam Hussein doesn't just shut him away. He says, let me hear what you have to say, and then corrects him, gives him the correct vision to have. In the case of Habib, again, the same thing. When Habib was getting lost in the apparent numbers, right, and he was submitting to ghayr Allah, he was submitting to the fact that, oh, there's 30,000, there's 1,000 here, we might be in trouble, and so on and so forth. Abu Abdullah quickly gets him to submit to Allah. So, authority isn't with individuals. Power is not with individuals, not with swords at all, it's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the case of Salman as well, when the second caliph was, when a usurper caliphate was coming in and kind of imposing a directive, we see that Salman sees that this is against the wisdom and will of the Holy Prophet, who in countless situations has appointed Amir al-Mu'mineen as his rightful representative. So Salman takes the authority and instead of submitting to Ghayrullah, he says, and I'm going to submit to the representative of Allah, and he goes to Amir al-Mu'mineen first. The end result didn't change, if you notice. In the traveling of Imam Hussein to Karbala, Imam Hussein still ended up going to Karbala, but the way he went is he fixed the viewpoint for Muhammad ibn Hanafiya and us today. In Habib's situation too, it's not the case that Habib getting riled up and submitting to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, getting emotional and so on, so would have brought those 1,000 people here, correct? And those 1,000 individuals didn't join Imam Hussein at the end of the day, but Habib himself purified himself through that submission to the Imam of his time. The last thing was what? Of Salman over. We saw that Salman in the second caliph. See that the end result in the apparent sense doesn't change, but everything does. The submission is no longer to Ghayrullah, it's actually to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat, please. When this comes into family life now, this is really important to understand. Because in family life too, we have control situations happening. There are 3 main areas that we will discuss because of the 3-part series. The first area is the relationship between the child and the parent. Okay, remember, relationships are direction specific. So this relationship, the first step is between the child towards the parent. So we're looking at it from the angle of the child right now and advising both the parents to get clarity regarding how the child should be. And if children are hearing this in the future, then this is advice to children as well, how to kind of digest that scenario. The second situation is between the spouses. So there's two relationships there. The relationship between the husband and wife, and the relationship between the wife and husband. You see, each individual is a manager for their direction. Okay, a wife is responsible for her. She's the manager of her relationship towards her husband, and the husband is the manager of his relationship towards his wife. How he manages that relationship is entirely in his control. It's one of his mayas. If the husband has an eye, one of the mayas of that particular eye, the associate, is my relationship to the spouse. You see that? And in that, you are a complete manager. It's possible to have somebody else, the opposite person, not do their part, not perform the way that they should be performing, but I maintain my relationship towards them appropriately and accurately. This is a reality. Islam teaches that. Where shaitan comes and teaches the exact opposite. Shaitan blurs the line and says, actually, Allah's expectations, na'uzubillah, are wrong. Where Allah expects us, Allah doesn't say, be a good husband only if the wife is good. Be a good wife only if the husband is good, correct? In our deen, these are the basics of our deen. We're not told to be a good X or good Y only if the other person is a good X or a good Y, right? Where shaitan comes and flips the equation and says, you know what, you can't be a good husband because your wife is not being a good wife. Or he comes to the wife and says, you can't be a good wife because your husband is not a good husband. You see that? So he comes and he flips that particular equation entirely. But Allah is saying, well, son, your relationship, you're the manager of it. There is a mechanism and there's a capacity for you to manage your relationship appropriately, regardless of what the other person does. Okay. The third thing, the last day we'll talk about, is the relationship between the parents now to the child. So it's going to be very much linked to this first talk that we're having. And that one's kept last because that actually includes the between two parents relationship too. Oftentimes, it's a more inclusive situation with parents towards child relationships, because you not only have to maintain what you are saying, you have to keep an eye on what the other partner has said too, because you don't want to come off as two teams, two friends, and so on and so forth. Salawat, please. Okay. Regarding the child towards parent relationship, we have to understand that as children are growing, from the time of toddlers really, their fitri nature, the way Allah has made them, is that they will slowly demand control. Okay, when they're a few months old and their feeding mechanism, they're completely dependent on the parents for that. Correct? They get a little bit older and they can't even lift a spoon yet, and you have to put the spoon in their mouth. They completely depend on you. As soon as their capacity increases, they can hold spoons now and so on and so forth. Fitratan, they want control, they want authority. It's a very fitri thing. See that? Okay. So they'll say, I'll do it, mine. They want basically, even in eating food and so on and so forth, you'll see that. As they're growing further, when they become a little bit more mature and so on and so forth, you'll see where they want control, those areas increase too. Okay. The attentive mind is one that sees these demands of control as areas where my child is currently developing. See that? The attentive mind is the one that doesn't get riled up by this, oh my God, my child is changing, they just constantly want control over A, B, and C, and so on and so forth. The attentive mind looks at what's happening in the parent and understands, this control that's being requested is requested after the child feels there's some capacity that they have. See that? So it uses that particular demand of control as a sign to see where my child is currently developing. Why is that important? Well, because once I see where my child is currently developing, then I can actually assist him in that particular field. You see that? Okay. This does not mean that I give all control at every time that they request for. It's not what we're saying at all. We're saying when the problem is presented, the active thinker, the active mind, the mind of a parent, observes that situation and says, this is a sign telling me that my child is developing in this area or that area or that area, and so on and so forth. For example, when a child grows a little bit further and gets to the stage where they want financial control, okay, that is a good time to start having talks and develop the child regarding financial existence. You see that? If you have that talk before that, they haven't requested control in that field, and you're talking about something that doesn't really fit the bill. Okay, it doesn't actually get to them, so they're not interested in that. If you talk later on, after the fact, when they themselves developed a financial model for themselves, a financial role model for themselves, that's too late, because now they're hooked onto the false idea of what a financial role model should be. So as your child is starting to display some aspects of control, requesting that control and so on and so forth, these are great signs to figure out where as a parent I should be working. Allah has created those signs fitratan in the child. Salawat, please. If you notice, this child, we talked a little bit about the earlier phases where the child is simply trying to eat food and its motor control skills and so on and so forth. Then we talked about certain aspects which link to the desire faculty, where it's typically linked to money or toys or objects of that matter, where they want to have control, basically. Um, uh, uh, Completely cold turkey removing that control is detrimental to the child, right? So, for example, if the child wants to hold something and I completely remove the child's capacity to hold on to that spoon or eat with their own hands and so on and so forth, what I'm doing is I'm creating a further drive in the child to pursue that and become more adamant towards that. Okay, the correct approach in that scenario for the toddler's phase, for example, is to provide an environment in which a limited control can be given and appropriate control can be given. Some parents, for example, would lay out a plastic mat, put a child's seat in the middle. It's okay, now the thing that was preventing me from giving control to your child was because you were going to fling food everywhere. And I don't want to clean everything all the time and so on and so forth. So your seating area and your food area, I'm going to develop as such that the problem that I had is mitigated. I have to clean only a small area, right? And it's plastic area so my carpet doesn't get wrecked and so on and so forth, and you can eat over here, for example. When it comes to other aspects too, like for example, sharing toys and so on as they get a little bit older, again, you have to recognize what the child is asking for, or what your hesitancy is, and use your intellect to appropriately allow for that child to have that which they want. Not to make them happy, to help them develop. You see, there's a difference between the two. So there's a time where the child doesn't want to share anything at all. Okay? And you're somebody who understands that, well, the child is exerting control, they're starting to say no to everything and so on and so forth. This tells you that perhaps the child has a problem with attachment or with trust. You see that? So you as a parent now has to go about creating a mechanism such that you address both of those. First of all, figure out which issue it is for your child, is to study your child, okay? And then provide an area to develop that child appropriately. If it's an attachment issue with a particular toy, right? And you deal with that appropriately. There's mechanisms and tricks for that. If it's a trust issue with a particular person or others and so on and so forth, you again address that issue appropriately. See what I'm trying to say? That the control mechanism that the child is displaying, this is a sign and symbol basically presented to the parent. The child grows and gets to the area of like his tweens and teens and a little bit further and so on and so forth, and he wants more control, more authority, more independence. Okay? And this time, up until now, if you notice, I was talking partially to parents as well as the child, explaining the child, because the child isn't somebody who's an audience at the moment. But the teens and the adult phase, the child is. Okay? So over here, when the child has that want to get control and have freedom in his life, be able to have their own things, have their own room, have their own scheduling, have their own say in things, and so on and so forth. As a child, the child should be recognizing that this in of itself is showing me an area that I am actually growing. I didn't have this 2 years ago, and I have it right now. Okay, so if I'm new to this, if I'm a beginner to this, and I go about without any understanding, any consideration, I'm in trouble. Okay, um, uh, uh, how am I in trouble? Well, because if I'm new to something, okay, let's say I'm new to fixing a phone, and I simply take a screwdriver and I say, okay, I'm going to try it, trial and error. Very quickly, I might end up breaking that particular phone. Okay, if a child wants a little bit of control, a little bit of authority in certain areas, the parent's job is to make them recognize that A, they realize that this is a place that the child is developing, and yes, there should be a place where they can have appropriate control. They should have appropriate capacities given to them to develop themselves here. Okay, B, they have to have an open talk with the child of some of the dangers that the child might not see. Okay, well, you want to be home and you don't want me to ask where you are and so on and so forth. I understand that you want some level of autonomy. Okay, you want some level of autonomy. Okay, but the reality is that here's some dangers. We live in a world where not everybody is very nice and safe and so on and so forth, right? You live in a world that in which if you were to, God forbid, be in trouble, it doesn't just impact you. I can't sleep either. You see that? It's not the case that it's a you problem and you got hurt and I can just go to sleep easily. No, I can't. I'll lose sleep. God forbid, if something more than that happens and you end up in the hospital, I'll be in further detriment as a parent, for example. Forget me, you'll lose out on a lot of other opportunities for growth and development and fun too if you're just sitting in the hospital in a cast. So when I'm saying, oh, just you can't go out with friends wherever you want without telling me, right? You're having that particular communication with that child. This is after recognizing and this is after communicating what? That control is a very fitri thing. You see, shaitan will come and make it about me or you. Shaitan will come to the child and make it about a me versus parent issue. It will come to the parent and make it about my say versus the child's say issue. You see that? Where the correct mechanism that Ahlul Bayt are teaching us is that, look, it's about the mechanism of growth that Allah has placed. Okay? That control request from the child isn't coming out of randomness, it's coming out of actual growth. It wasn't there 3 years ago. And even now, where it exists, its intensity is developing differently. You, as a parent, are responsible for a live individual. Hence, when the request for control changes for the child, you have to be the appropriate manager for that as well. And management does not mean shunning. If you look at Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when Muhammad ibn Hanafiya came and said, I think I know better, and said, don't go here and don't go there and so on and so forth, and Hussein alayhi salam said, let me hear you out, and then responded to him with logic. You see that? Salawat, please. We live in a world where control is something that is not always exactly as we see it. We don't always have entire control over every aspect of our children's behavior, and children don't have complete control over their development either. There are youth who want to go to Qom to study or Najaf to study and so on and so forth, but due to parental restrictions can't. There are youth who want to get married at a certain age, but because of parental restrictions can't. There's youth who want to study a particular thing, but because of parental restrictions might not be able to, and so on and so forth. We live in a real world, right? And these real world issues, and not all of them are problems, some of them are safeguards, right? Are there. They're very prevalent and they're very true. The wrong interaction with them is one that feeds frustration and animosity. How do I know if my family system is interacting with it incorrectly? Is when my child or myself am progressively becoming more frustrated. Okay, when that frustration is increasing, remember, who's the manager of my relationship to the child? Well, I am. Who's the manager of the child relationship to me? Well, the child is. So as a teen, as a young person, when I see that my relationship with my parents is something that is becoming infuriating, frustrating, bothersome, and so on and so forth, and that is increasing, it's my job to reassess that paradigm. Okay? Vice versa. when it comes to the parent scenario, we'll talk about more about that parent side on the third night, inshallah. It's the parent's job also to now reassess and reframe that scenario. Allah didn't put us in a family structure to make us into pressure cookers, okay? To like, problems happen and you don't deal with it properly until you just explode one time and you wreck everything, and then again you try to mend it. Because when this happens, relationships gets destroyed and people don't develop. When people don't develop, we have 40-year-old children in society, 50-year-old children in society, because the family system simply didn't provide that mechanism of growth. Salawat, please. In Karbala, we see that Abu Abdullah, with the lowest number of companions that we can think of in terms of fighting against the enemy. See, he started off with a number, okay? And then slowly, as they became shaheed, that number dwindled down until it became only one individual in the battlefield of Karbala, correct? We see that the control Abu Abdullah had on the whole battlefield doesn't change. Even when he is the last person and he's fighting the enemy, even at that time, he's able to use both the sword and his speech to control the enemy from going and attacking the tents. When Shimr comes and says to the individuals to go attack the tents of Abu Abdullah while Abu Abdullah is alive, Abu Abdullah uses his speech there. His sword can't reach that far because he's surrounded by enemies. He uses his speech. He says, "Are you not free men? If you have lost all faith and all deen, right, at least be free men. Your fitrah should tell you that while I, a protector of the family, is alive, you should not go and attack my tents." You see that? Abu Abdullah, even one individual against an army of 30,000 wolves, right, appropriately uses the tools at his disposal to maintain control in the hands of Allah. It's not about him and them and him and them. It's about the wilayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We see that same control and development, right, continue after Ashura. When Imam Sajjad alayhi salam and Sayyidah Zainab are now being taken from Kufa and enter there and then go into the court of Ibn Ziyad, they stay there for a while, then they're then marched on to Sham. This caravan of Abu Abdullah that is now led by Imam Sajjad and Sayyidah Zainab, did they have a need to give speeches and talks? They were prisoners, correct? We see throughout the journey, not one but many individuals give prominent speeches. You see that? And it's not the case that these speeches are simply saying, "Oh, you've wronged us." Many times they start with some of the greatest ma'arif regarding Tawheed, some of the greatest explanations and understanding regarding Imamah, and regarding the corruption which Banu Umayyah had. You see that? So the Ahl Bayt alayhimus salam, as they're going on this journey, and if you look at a caravan that has now been taken as captive, you don't see an apparent and immediate need for them to now give speeches. They're captives. They're in a detrimental situation. Their children are crying. Their women folk are in trouble. They're in chains. Imam Sajjad himself is gone through a situation where the riwayat state that when he approaches the area of Kufa, it seems as if he will pass away from the pain that he's in, because he was extremely sick, and on top of that, he had chains upon him, and there was atrocities that the enemy had done to him. In all those situations, we see that the Ahl Bayt don't back away from giving the correct dosage of guidance when it's needed. Imam Sajjad, Sayyidah Zainab, and so on. And in this particular way, they're actually taking control of the development of the Ummah. You see that? Where Yazid and Shaitan's cronies are thinking that they have quelled the movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, right? And now they're quote unquote parading the caravan of Imam Hussein to display how much control they have over the Ummah. Imam Sajjad and the ladies of Imam Hussein's caravan use that very same route to take control of the Ummah. You see that? It's not about a miraculous change of things. It's not. It's about the very battlefield that Shaitan is presenting. You oppose him in that same battlefield and turn the tides. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. As the caravan of Imam Hussein is about to approach Kufa, this was a city Amirul Mu'mineen, their grandfather, had ruled. Amirul Mu'mineen in his caliphate was in Kufa. This was a city where Sayyidah Zainab remembered her high status. Some of her students were in the crowd. A narration says that as the Ahlul Bayt were approaching, some women folk approached them and they say, "We can't bear to see these tattered clothes upon your body." They rush and they bring fresh clothes for the Ahlul Bayt as they're approaching Kufa. Alas, what a time has come that the family of the Holy Prophet, the ones who taught the entire world of chastity, purity, hijab, they taught the world of guidance and assistance. Now they were in a position where their clothes had the dust and sands of Karbala on it. They had been whipped and their clothes were now in a state that required to be freshened up. Alas, they're living in a time, they're going to a city where their students are now approaching them. And their Sayyidah Zainab accepts some garments from them and then addresses the masses. She tells to the individuals over there, and as she's giving this powerful speech, narrations say that there was absolute silence in the bazaar. All individuals quieted down, listening to the voice of Amirul Mu'mineen through his daughter. And in that particular moment, Sayyidah Zainab gives a speech which lets them know that if they think that they are not responsible for that which happened in Karbala, it's not the case. Inappropriately dealing with difficulties makes you responsible for the outcomes. May Allah curse the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt and allow for the hastening of the reappearance of the Imam. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.